This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources families and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This show is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Here's your host, Trever Shirin.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. We are so glad that you're joining us. I'm Trever Shirin, and this is Dr. Mayfield.
What's going on? We're actually a little more awake today.
Yeah, it's because we're starting at like 8:10 instead of 8. Big difference.
The extra 10 minutes. Woo!
Today's episode is going to be about Erickson's stages of development.
Okay, so don't glaze over or turn it off. This is actually really beneficial, and it's not as academic as you think it's going to be.
And the reason that I thought that it would be an important topic for us to cover is that this kind of gives a framework for the different challenges that we have to go through in order to develop as human beings. And once we understand how these work and the progression and what approximate ages these can happen in.
Love the preface there.
It helps us to kind of understand like, oh, okay, so that's why my teenager is acting in this way, or that's why my middle schooler is really struggling in this way. So we hope that this kind of gives a little bit of context and some framework to see your kids differently.
And don't take it to the bank either, because as you know, everybody's kid's different. So these are approximations, and they are also, I think, just milestones or things to be mindful of. But Erickson developed these, 50, 60 years ago, and things have changed.
Yeah. But one of the reasons that we still talk about it in the counseling world is because in a lot of ways it makes sense.
Well, nobody's come up with anything better.
Yeah, nobody. Well, and I mean, same could probably be true about the theory of gravity. You know, nobody's come up with a better idea.
Right. So, better explanation.
You know. So, but I personally really like Erickson's because it helps me give language to things that I see, and helps me to, one, have grace, because I've talked on this show before that as soon as I have more context for a behavior, it's easier for me to have grace for that.
Yep.
And so if I know the stage of development for a high schooler, kind of, maybe, it helps me to see it as like, oh, it makes sense that they would be struggling in this way because they're trying to develop that sense of identity.
Well, it's funny because my wife and I, Sarah, and I were talking last night a little bit about this podcast as I was preparing for it, and she reminded me that as I was learning about this for the first time, my daughter was like 2-3 months old. Okay. Right. So I'm like, okay, you know, but we were joking a little bit because we're talking about you and Bree.
Oh yeah.
Going, next year or the year and a half, whenever you have kids, I'm not sure if this is going to hurt you or help you, but it'll be interesting to kind of watch. It will be interesting. Watch you guys.
I'm sure this is going to be a downfall, but there's a part of me that really wants to film different things in my child's life of like, hey, my child does not have object permanency right now. Let me film the same activity twice, and now that they do,
so
film again.
So are you going to be like Leonard's mom on Big Bang Theory?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably.
Just,
I'll admit
just
to it.
All the. My life was a research project.
Right.
Yes. But back to the topic. But this is, I mean, it is fun, and I, if you've been to any of my parent talks or any of my talks in the community, I base a lot of what I talk about off these stages because I think, especially when we're talking about middle school and high school, and we'll talk a little bit about delayed adolescence too. But it does give context, and it helps parents go, okay, am I crazy or is this normal? And when we find out that it's normal, they're like, okay, this is good. So, why don't you give us an overview of the stages?
Great. So we've got from birth to 12 months is trust, mistrust. And keep in mind, these dates for how old the age range is so broad. And so a lot of the times I like to think about it more in a way of these are the things that have to happen before the next stage.
Right. And I will say, though, that the trust versus mistrust piece is highly foundational. Mm-hmm. Other ones are a little bit more debatable, but that's highly foundational. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
We can talk about that. Autonomy versus shame and doubt is toddlers about 1 to 3 years. Initiative versus guilt. This is preschool children around 3 to 6. We've got industry versus inferiority, ages 6 to 12. Identity versus role confusion, 12 to 18.
And again, that's a really important one we'll come back to.
Yep. Intimacy versus isolation, 20s to early 40s. We get bigger in our age range. Generativity versus stagnation, about 40s to mid 60s. And then integrity versus despair is 60s to end of life. Now, Dr. Mayfield, one thing that I think we should explain a little bit is all of these have a very similar theme of blah-blah-blah versus blah-blah-blah. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Well, I think Erickson wanted to figure out, okay, if somebody has navigated through the stage well, here's the general understanding of what they will come away with. And if they don't, here's the general understanding of what they will come away with. Now, again, very black and white in how we read this, mm-hmm. not black and white in how they play out.
No, not at all.
And so I will say that, we stopped on 2. We stopped on trust versus mistrust, and then identity versus role confusion is kind of, at least in my work over the last 10 years or so, has seen that those are pretty big deals. But, we can, it's not we're going to have autonomy and we're not going to have shame and doubt, or we're going to have initiative and we're not going to have guilt.
Right.
I think, which one comes out stronger is something that we'll look at. And I think I think all of us counselors, we scale things. And so don't roll your eyes at us, but, on a scale of 1 to 10, and for autonomy versus shame and doubt, which we'll come to in a minute, maybe you're a 7 on the scale of autonomy, but you have like a 4 of shame and doubt.
Well, right. And here's a question too, that I've heard talked about every once in a while, and I want to talk about here as well, that if you do not quote unquote succeed in a stage of development, you cannot proceed to the next stage. Can you speak to that?
I disagree with that, actually, and I'm sure I'll have people listening to this, they're going to throw stones at me, but I don't think it's that clear cut. Right? I mean, you're going to get older, right? You're not going to be 12 months old for the rest of your life. Right. You're going to make it to 1 to 3, and so I think the bigger one is if you don't hit the trust, what we see, the trust versus mistrust, mm-hmm. if that's not done well, it does screw up quite a bit. Yeah. And we'll talk about attachment, we'll talk about reactive attachment, we'll talk about adoption, we'll talk about those kinds of things that can disrupt that. But if the attachment disruption in the birth to 12 months is not, it's there, but is not super, a super huge rift, you can come back and I came back in identity versus role confusion stage and healed that piece of me. But no,
I think that speaks to something really important.
Yeah.
You can move through the other stages if one hasn't been quote unquote succeeded or whatever. But I do think that it's important to realize that each layer of development is building on top of each other.
Yeah.
And so if we're not developing, we've already established trust, mistrust, foundational stage.
We don't understand. I mean, we don't realize until recently that the first 48 hours of a child's life is crucial for this stage.
Right.
Skin on skin contact, eye to eye, the scent, the chemical connections between parents, the skin on skin contact that does with the oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone, which it creates attachment, mm-hmm. all those kinds of things. And so for like myself, self-disclosure, like I was, 7 weeks premature, and so didn't have that, right? I had a great family life, obviously normal struggles and that kind of stuff. But that void hindered some of my development.
Yeah.
Right. And thus my 12-year-old 6th grade, meltdown.
Yeah.
So I think that has a big deal. But for kids that have been, they're in the adoption system and that kind of stuff, or the foster to adopt, even if they had some of that, there's still a layer of a foundational development that this provides. But we don't realize how important it is.
Yeah. And I think that as you're talking, I'm realizing that a lot of these stages we go through multiple times. There's a time when we go through it, and it's the primary point of development for that concept. But we're constantly going back to trust, mistrust, and autonomy versus shame, doubt. And I think that life as a whole is a practice of developing. It is not becoming developed.
Well, it's cyclical, right? You get married. Well, you're going to start trust versus mistrust, right? And then you're going to go, okay, autonomy versus shame and doubt. And I think you start a job, you're going to go so I think this can be applied to all different angles. But I don't want to assume that our listeners know what these words mean.
Exactly.
And so this idea, obviously trust versus mistrust, is pretty common to
hopefully that one makes a little bit of sense.
That makes sense. But this autonomy versus shame and doubt, so toddlers 1 to 3, Trevor, can you explain what autonomy is?
Yeah, so autonomy is essentially being able to make your own choices, to do your own thing, to be your own person. And it's, agency, autonomy, independence, all similar concepts. And so this idea of autonomy versus shame and doubt is, can I do this or can I not do this?
Well, it's also, I think, the opinion. When you think about it, I've not met a 2-year-old that's not opinionated.
Yeah.
Right? No, I don't like that. Yes, I like that. No, I'm not going to wear that.
That's mine.
You're gonna make me wear that?
Right.
Well, we're gonna have an issue with that. Right. That's them exercising this idea of independence, autonomy. I'm not mom. I'm not dad. I'm myself, and they're beginning to figure that out. Now we can go through Piaget stages some other time, but basically they're figuring out. Okay, I have an opinion.
Yep.
Now they don't have the cognitive wherewithal to formulate that in a way that's not screaming,
they're
yelling,
1 to 3
and
years
throwing.
of age.
Right. But here's where, as parents, we have a real opportunity to go, okay, I'm going to let them exercise that. I'm going to mold them in, okay, you can't throw that at my face because you don't like it. That's not okay. But thank you for telling me you don't like that. Yeah. But a lot of times that shame and doubt piece comes in when we think that they should be acting as teenagers and or as adults and having that cognitive wherewithal, and we shame them, we yell at them, we demean them, and that's where I think that breaks down that autonomy. And if you've ever maybe experienced that yourself, where you've voiced an opinion and somebody told you that was stupid, like you begin to question yourself.
Yeah,
and
some insecurity can whelm up.
So imagine that from a 1 to 3 year old perspective.
Right. Well, and I think that with this stage, let's go from a perspective of, let's say we do this really, really well. What does that look like?
I think really, really well. Having our kid go through that stage, I think really, really well is allowing them to exercise their opinion. One of the things that we started doing with our girls is that we laid out 3 choices for clothing.
So now I have autonomy to choose which of these 3 options is that false dichotomy or false trichotomy, I guess.
Right, yeah. But it's, okay, here's your choices.
Yeah.
We lay out, here's your snack options. They can choose.
Yep.
So it's creating that choice, but then also them being able to voice their opinion. And so...
we leave this stage being able to voice our opinion, being able to make decisions, being able to have our opinions.
Right.
If we don't do this stage well,
have you ever met that kid that just you could see is filled with shame? Like, I'm not good enough. I'm not listened to. Obviously a 3-year-old's not gonna be able to put those words to it.
Right.
But they kind of slink back. They don't engage. And you see how that parent is reacting and interacting with them. It's harsh tone, it's demeaning, it's those kinds of things. And I think that's what you'll see in that stage.
And so the next stage is initiative versus guilt. And this is approximately preschool, ages 3 through 6.
So remember, shame is I am bad.
Guilt is I did something bad.
Right. Guilt is I did something bad. So and this is where I find initiative versus guilt. Actually, guilt can be a good thing in context. But this idea of initiative is basic. I mean, it's what it is. Like you want your kid at between 3 and 6 years old to try something new, to assert themselves, to explore, to engage.
Find out what happens if you do a dance inside the toilet.
Right.
Which is really where, we think about this stage. They're doing things that
they don't know the consequence
can get them into trouble.
Right. Well, like last night, I was out in the front driveway washing my cars, and my 5.5-year-old was out there. And at that, we live in a safe neighborhood, and they can play on the front yard, ride their bikes up and down the sidewalk, whatever they want. But I just said, please, I've told her, please don't throw rocks, right? And she looked at me and she goes, okay, yeah, I won't throw rocks. And she got in her own little world and she threw a rock. And I said, Ellie, please do not throw a rock. Okay. And then come around, and about a half hour later, a rock went past my foot. And I looked at her and I said, hey, what did Daddy ask? I didn't shame, I didn't guilt. I said, but I need you to go inside. You've lost the privilege of playing outside. Well, she took initiative, and it was in a way that she was exploring and that kind of stuff. But I set some boundaries.
Yep.
She didn't follow them, and there was a little bit of guilt there.
Yeah.
Like I messed up. Well, it was interesting, and this is where I was kind of proud of our parenting skills. She goes in, tells my wife, and she goes, okay, you need to respect what Daddy asked, and I'm sorry that that's happened. I know you want to be outside. And she looked at my wife and said, can I go apologize to Daddy? On her own.
Yeah.
So she comes out and apologizes. I'm like, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I said, if it happens again, we're done for the night.
Well, and I think that speaks to, there's this idea that guilt will become shame with enough compounding in time.
Oh, if I yelled in tone, if I, said you're lost privilege of playing outside for the rest of the week,
rest of your life, never again. And I think what I see in that story is that she showed initiative of trying new things. And then there was a bit of guilt, which is a reinforcement of a behavior and going inside, but then the initiative of I'm going to get over this guilt, I'm going to work through this guilt, I'm going to process it by apologizing to my dad.
Yep.
And I think that shows a really excellent example of what this stage can look like.
Sure. And even simplifying it more. Hey, 5-year-old, let me show you how to do laundry. Just put it in. Here's the soap. We'll do it with you, pull it out, teach you how to fold your clothes. You fold your clothes, you put them away, right? There's some mastery of something like, oh, I have purpose.
Yeah.
And
you can see already how these stages of development build off of each other. Imagine trying to show initiative when you have no sense of autonomy or you're living out of shame and doubt. The next one is industry versus inferiority, and we're getting into the ones that I really like.
These are my favorite ones.
These are really interesting. So, industry versus inferiority.
Well, I think about if we don't use this word very much anymore, but growing up, my grandmother used to say, "Well, you're very industrious." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
I don't know what that means.
Right?
But okay.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Grandma. But it's the understanding, it's the development of pride around things that we do.
Yep.
Right. So we find out, oh, I'm really my almost 11-year-old is a fantastic artist, and it was her mom and I encouraging her, and finally, she came out the other day and she goes, "Look at this. This is pretty good." Yeah. Right. That's the industry of going, I can do something really well. It's figuring out, okay, I'm good at sports. I'm good at school. I'm good at but in here, it's that growth mindset of, I want to learn more. I want to grow. I want to develop. Inferiority is kind of what I struggled with because I didn't go through the trust versus mistrust stage very well. And I felt inadequate, inferior, didn't measure up, but that was also compounded by being bullied and made fun of as well. This is a really important stage in that sense.
Yeah. And I think the inferiority thing too, this can speak to a lot of empowerment of, are you empowered? Because it's not only can you do it, the autonomy aspect and the initiative, but it's...
And I don't know if I like that word as much anymore.
Inferiority?
No, empowerment.
Empowerment.
I get what it means, but it doesn't capture, in my mind, doesn't capture fully what I think it should. There's an assumption that the person that you're trying to empower doesn't have power to begin with. And I'm like, So I get the
empower.
I don't know what we got to figure out a different way, but I get it. I think we want to help them find their voice and grow, but we also want to tap into the power that they already have.
Right. And I think if we do this well, we can pull on that autonomy and that initiative, and not only can they do it,
right,
but they can do it well.
Yes, and so I think part of that is, like my 11-year-old will do her laundry by herself. And she'll fold them, and they're not exactly the way Daddy would do it, but I'm not going to come back and correct it.
Yeah, well, there are college students that don't even get that far.
Right,
so.
right. But I'm not going to go back and correct it. She made her bed, and it's not as like how but it's okay, right? It's that creating that industry of, okay, I've accomplished something. I'm good at this, and as they get older, they'll go, oh, that's a little wonky. I'm going to go fix it.
Well, and we've had my dad on this show before, and we've talked a little bit about what I'm about to talk about. So keep in mind that I love my dad, and
we love you,
fantastic.
Love you.
There are things in how he parented me that could have been improved, obviously, with all parents.
Sure.
One way was every Saturday we would have to do cleaning and different projects and work on the car and things like this. It was project day. And my dad, when I was younger, was very critical. And so it wasn't enough to just do it. We had to do it to his standard, right. Which, one, pushing us to succeed in a way to do things excellently. Like, I get
nothing
that.
wrong with that if it's done well. Yeah.
But I don't know if it was done as well as it could have been, in that there were times when I felt so overwhelmed by the standard that was put on me that I didn't feel like I could ever measure up, and so I gave up.
Right.
And so in a lot of ways, I've had to press into my dad and on house projects that I would have done when I was younger, or car projects that I would have done when I was younger, and he invited me to do it. But I found ways to escape because I didn't like that pressure on me to be as good as he wanted me to be, or as I perceived that he wanted me to be. And so so I think there's a very subtle way that these can move too, that we may not even be able to realize until later on in life.
What's what happens when you're the oldest? You're kind of the guinea pig. And,
I definitely was.
Your
I'm
younger
sure.
brothers are like, got it good now.
I think my parents really nailed it around like the third kid, the fourth kid probably. So we're realizing that we're probably at about 21 minutes or so on this episode.
We should just keep on going, and we'll just do a 2-part.
I think we're going to do a 2-part. So join us next week. We're going to get into some of the really, really meaty, fun stuff. Not that this hasn't been fun, but it gets more interesting and more,
existential?
Existential in nature. So we hope that you join us next week. We will continue our conversation about Erickson's stages of development.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, you can email candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or call 719-452-4803.